Last week we discussed the nature of the U.S. economy and the degree to which it's overheating. We appreciated some of the moving parts. Today, we're going to dig deeper into the implications of this debate for policymakers, both monetary and fiscal. So, Greg, I want to turn to you then, give you an opportunity to speak on monetary policy. So, to what degree do you think current kind of Fed stance has maybe contributed to some degree to the overheating question that you've articulated, and what's the roadmap in your mind, the appropriate roadmap in your mind for them going forward, given these concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a strong case to be made that the Fed is behind the curve, and I think they're realizing that. I think they've had a fairly rapid change in policy stance that they've communicated over the last month and a half, 2 months now. One very simplistic way to look at it, but I don't think it's completely inaccurate, is just to say what is the real short-term interest rate right now? So economists believe that the actual driving policy rate is not the nominal one, but one that's adjusted for inflation. So effectively, we have an interest rate that's close to zero. The Fed suggested it might go as high as a whopping 1% this year, based on their December meeting, and we have inflation that's 7%. So that puts us at a real interest rate of minus 6%, which would make it the most negative real rate in the history of the Fed funds rate. So it's potentially a very, very stimulative economic policy, even with the Fed changing stance, limiting QE, and starting to raise the short-term rate. If we go back and look at a Taylor rule model, which is sort of just a simple mechanical calculation that does a good job of characterizing historical policy rates, and you plug in a 4% inflation rate, you plug in a GDP gap that's 0 or greater than 0, and you plug in a real equilibrium rate of 1 or 2%, and you easily get a Fed funds rate that should be 5%, potentially as high as 10%.
Response.
So I think that view of whether that the funds rate should be 5 or 10% is predicated on the kind of this current level of inflation continuing, and also predicated on the view that the kind of neutral interest rate should be, real interest rate should be 1 or 2%. And I have some questions about both. So the first is, let's just kind of go back on the real interest rate. So when we were at the Fed, that was kind of the standard model, that the real interest rate should be around 2, neutral inflation adjusted interest rate should be around 2%. But recent history has shown, and there's been a lot of research on this, that the neutral real interest rate has fallen. And if we just look at what happened in 2018 when the Fed raised rates, their peak was 2.25% on the upper bound, 2 on the lower bound, and so an average of 2 1/8. So their peak was 2.25%. And at that level, you saw the economy slow and interest rate sensitive sectors such as housing take a hit. So the first premise is, does the Fed need to get to 2%, or is really 0 on an inflation adjusted basis the right number of the Fed kind of having their foot off the gas, but not on the brake pedal, so kind of being in neutral. The second one is where you think inflation is going to go. So as I said, the Fed and the private sector should be very humble about their forecasts. But if you think that inflation is going to slow because of the factors that I discussed, increase in labor force, decent productivity, a shift in demand towards services, away from goods, then you could say inflation, as expectations are in the private sector, will fall close to 2% by the end of the year. And so if you do that math applied to the Taylor rule, you actually get that the funds rate should be around 1%, which is where the Fed is kind of currently predicting, or they've penciled in 3 to 4 rate hikes. Although there has been a more hawkish shift these days. So I think they're being careful to say we are watching this and making sure that everybody knows that if they need to be more aggressive, they will.
So let's transition from the monetary authority, the central bank, to the fiscal authority, the taxing and spending authority of this nation. And I think we can we can all appreciate the sizable effort that we've made as a nation. In fact, you could say the same thing about the globe abroad as well. I mean, we've seen fiscal support that has not been witnessed in generations, frankly. Right. And so, leaving aside some of the political challenges of moving forward, and there are many, how important has the current level of fiscal support been? And is it appropriate to engage in additional multi-trillion-dollar efforts, given that there may be some risk on the upside of overheating? So I'll start with you, Gerald, and then let Greg chime in.
So I think clearly the level of support that we've had in the last year needs to decline, and it has and is likely to continue to do so. The question is, should we continue to have targeted support, potentially politically difficult, but as I was saying, for folks that are hampered by COVID and the recent surge in Omicron, that can't work because of childcare, continuing extending the expanded child tax credit would have been beneficial, in my opinion. So I think some targeted policies in the near term to kind of retain demand and in communities or for workers that have a harder time with COVID, I think should continue to occur. And that has long-term benefits because you keep folks engaged in the economy, you keep a roof over their heads, they're more likely to return to the labor force, you potentially give them options to continue to train online, all things that you could do that don't cost a lot of money, maybe cost up more political capital. I think those things would continue to be beneficial. I think you're asking a broader question about Build Back Better, and again, whether there are a set of policies, paid leave, long-term child care that are beneficial to the economy, which I believe there are. I'm not saying all of them, but there are a set of policies that are beneficial to the economy and that we need to spend money on, but the spending is not likely to occur tomorrow or today with the economy, with a debate about the economy being overheated or not. So I think making investments in the future that don't cost a lot today are beneficial, and we shouldn't let kind of current concerns about the economy hamper our ability to make those investments that I believe are needed.
So views on fiscal policy to date and roadmap going forward in light of your concerns about overheating.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you noted, the amount of fiscal policy and fiscal stimulus that we had over the last couple of years was just unbelievable. The IMF estimates that it was something on the order of 25% of GDP. So they kind of looked across a broad range of developed economies to try to figure out how large the fiscal stimulus was. They found that the fiscal stimulus in the U.S. was the largest of any developed economy. So I think that in my view, excess demand that we have right now is in part driven by this very, very strong fiscal policy response. I think it was appropriate in 2020 to have a strong response, but I think we probably overdid it last year with the last round of stimulus at the beginning of the Biden administration. That's not to say there aren't valuable things that we can invest in. I agree with Gerald. There are some things that we can do. I think we just need to be very focused on this notion of what's going to impact demand and what's going to impact supply. So we should not be adding new fiscal expenditures on things that are going to increase near-term demand. That's going to risk further overheating the economy. We can make important investments in things that will increase supply, and I agree. If we can find ways of getting people back into work, providing solutions for childcare for people where that's keeping them out of the workforce, that's a way to increase the labor force participation. If we can provide ways to quickly upskill people so that they're better able to work in jobs and be more productive, that also increases the productive capacity of the economy. So we just need to be very, very thoughtful about what fiscal policy is going to do in the next year or two to make sure that it's focused on increasing productive capacity and supply versus exacerbating excess demand.
So I think one thing we can agree on is there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding this question and a comprehensive answer to how overheated is the U.S. economy. It's going to remain frustratingly elusive for a while, and I want to thank our debaters for providing a framework to help us better appreciate what these moving parts are and to understand the complicated forces at work.